Hello fellow makeup lovers, how are you guys doing today? I am super excited for this video because we're going to be comparing the new Alter Ego Sakura palette to the Natasha Denona Retro Glam palette. If you're not familiar, Alter Ego is an eyeshadow brand that does dupes, but they do kind of add their own packaging, they do their own names, they also kind of change the colors around as well. I've reviewed many of their palettes in the past and my overall thoughts have been that they are decent quality, pretty good dupes of a lot of Natasha Denona eyeshadow palettes. Obviously, it's not going to be the exact same. Sometimes the Natasha Denona mattes blend a little bit better. Sometimes the shimmers are just a little bit more intense. But if you're not wanting to pay the Natasha Denona price tag, then I do feel like Alter Ego is a really, really good option. And I've continued to use some of the palettes that I have from them, even though I have the OG that they're supposed to be duping. So I was really, really excited about this one because I love the Retro Glam color story. Just excited to compare them today and see how similar they are, and hopefully this will help you guys out. So just to show you what they look like next to one another, you can see that the Sakura palette is actually a little bit more organized and I really like the way that it looks. I'm going to go through the Retro Glam palette one by one, and then I'll show you the shade in the Alter Ego palette that I feel like is duping it the closest, and we can just see how we feel. The Sakura palette does retail for $20, and the Retro Glam palette retails for $69, so there is quite a big price difference. It's kind of funny to say this since I'm comparing both of these, but I actually do have an affiliate code with both brands. So if you are looking to purchase either the more expensive or the least expensive option, my code AMYLOVES works for either one. Let's go ahead and start swatching. So the first shade in the Retro Glam palette is a pink shade right here called Flare, and it's just kind of like a satiny, soft berry pink shade. We are going to compare that to the shade Cherry, which Cherry is actually a little bit more sparkly. I would say that the shade is pretty much spot on. Even the texture feels pretty similar. So here is Natasha Denona and here is Alter Ego. Next we have the shade Jazzy, which is the deepest shade in the palette. It's a really deep gray satin. So there's what Jazzy looks like. And I'm going to compare that to this shade right here called Plum, the one that I stuck my finger in earlier because that's just my luck. I feel like Jazzy was a little more creamy to the touch and Plum might have just a little bit more of a shine to it, but overall, again, very, very close. So there's Natasha Denona and there's Alter Ego. The Alter Ego is actually just a touch lighter. Next we have the shade Oscar, which is a really pretty kind of satiny olive. Definitely one of the shades that I've used the most in this palette. I'm gonna compare that to the shade Live. I'm trying to be nitpicky about this. I feel like Live might be just a tiny touch more powdery, but they actually, again, look so, so close. So here's Natasha Denona. And here is Alter Ego. I think the Alter Ego is like slightly lighter, but I feel like that's one of those differences that you couldn't even tell on the eyes. Next we have the shade Evergreen, which is a creamy matte finish from Natasha Denona, and I actually don't love that shade because I feel like in the palette it looks like it's gonna be a really deep, beautiful green, but it actually swatches much, much lighter. So I'll show you what it looks like. It feels pretty, but I just don't feel like it keeps that intensity. So I'm curious to see. I'm gonna compare that to the shade Grove here. Oh, okay, well that is a creamy matte finish. I cannot lie. They actually feel very similar. The Alter Ego has like a little bit more of a satiny like look to it, but the texture is very similar, which I wasn't expecting. Here is Natasha Denona, and here is Alter Ego. They actually got that spot on, which I'm slightly disappointed by because I feel like I would have liked that more if they had just done a regular matte because, like I said, I mean, I feel like it looks pretty there. Like it looks decent swatched out, but I feel like if you're trying to build it up in your outer V, that one just, I don't know, ends up looking pretty light. Next we have this shade right here called Marlin, which is a beautiful metallic mint, such a stunning shade. I think the closest one is this one called Fair. Okay, yeah. It's close, but it's not quite the same. I feel like mint is definitely a little bit lighter. Here is ND, and here is Alter Ego. So again, those are close, but not the closest of what we've seen so far. We have another satin deep gray. This one is called Maxi. It's a little bit lighter than Jazzy. Here's what it looks like. It has like a tiny bit more of like a neutral brown gray vibe to it. And I'm gonna compare that to this shade right here called Lush. Okay, Lush seems a little bit more shiny again, but overall pretty close. Here's Natasha Denona, and here is Alter Ego. Those are pretty close. Next we have this sagey, soft, matte pastel, which is called Sage. And I'm going to compare that to this shade right here called Sky. Is Natasha Denona, and here is Alter Ego. Those two, pretty similar. I mean, maybe the Natasha Denona has like just a touch more green to the teal shade, but again, it's so close that like on the eyes, there's no way that you'd be able to tell a difference. Next, we have the shade Holly, and I'm gonna compare that to this shade right here called Spring, which I feel like Spring, actually, you know what? Let me stop myself. Maybe it's just the backgrounds of the palettes. I thought Spring was going to be more like dusty and less like pastel, but it's just in comparison with the pink here, it looks less pink. But it's actually very, very similar. Again, Natasha Denona, Alter Ego. Spot on. So that is the first set of swatches. I'm gonna have to wipe this off so that we can keep going. But I mean, so far, it's an incredible dupe. As far as shades go, next we have a light mint green matte, which is called Fringe. And I'm gonna compare that to this light mint matte right here called Pale. The Natasha Denona one actually looks more powdery for this shade. So there's Natasha Denona, and there's Alter Ego. Next we have the shade Faye, which these two like browns here, I feel like might be the most different just from like looking between the palettes. I thought the Alter Ego was not that similar, so here is Faye, which is like this dirty olive, beautiful matte. So I'm gonna compare that to this shade right here called Hazy. You know what, you guys? I'm actually wrong. Those are so similar. I feel like the shades in the palette is just throwing me off. So there's Natasha Denona, and there's Alter Ego. The Alter Ego on that one is just a touch thinner. Okay, on to the final row. I'm gonna go into the shade Flutter now, which I'm thinking I'm gonna like the Alter Ego one more because this is a really pretty champagne shade, but it just is a little bit flaky and just not like the best quality shimmer. And then from Alter Ego, we have the shade Prime, which this one is like a similar shade and it looks really, really beautiful, but it's nowhere near as flaky. You can see it's much more smooth. That's what I have on the inner corner, and I just think it looks so pretty. So here's Natasha Denona, and here is Alter Ego. The Alter Ego one is slightly less pinky, a little bit more silvery, so the shade is not exactly spot on. Next we have the shade Lucy, which is that softer, kind of grungy olive matte, lighter of the two. So I'm gonna compare that to this shade right here called Wilt. Here is Natasha Denona, and here is Alter Ego. Pretty much the same. Next we have the shade Palladian. I always feel like I'm saying that one wrong, but it's a really pretty soft satin mint. It's almost like a mixture of a mint and a silver. So I'm gonna compare that to the shade right here called Radiant. Okay, Radiant is, a little bit less minty almost. It's funny because it looks more green in the pan, but I feel like it's not. So here's Natasha Denona, and here's Alter Ego. I actually like the Natasha Denona one for that one much more because it just has more green to it. Next we have the shade Belle, which is the darker of the two pinks. And I'm gonna compare that to the shade Petal. Again, they don't look the same in the palette, but they swatch the same. Ooh, so pretty. Okay, last but not least, we have the shade Oz, which is a really dark green satin. I'm gonna compare that to this shade right here called Twinkle. There's Oz, and there is Twinkle. I feel like Oz is a little bit more olivey. Overall, again, pretty close. So there is the second set of swatches. All right, y'all, so you can see that the shades are pretty much spot on between these two. I really hope that this video was helpful, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye.